One of the indicators that this is a unique ecosystem is the number of endemic species. We have several different species of turtles that are found only in the Pascagoula River system. And then there are other species that are rare outside this ecosystem. The fact that this is a functioning habitat and these species are able to survive, have viable populations here, where in other places where they've disappeared, then this shows that this is a functioning ecosystem that's still healthy, still large enough to provide all the needs of those animals. Now, the Pascagoula River Basin is a very large basin, and what happens upstream, of course, eventually affects these marshes.
No ecosystem is self-contained. They exist in relation to one another, even if their habitats appear very different. The fresh water from the river affects the Bayou, as does the Gulf and its salt water.
These areas are tidally influenced areas, and you have that salt water moves in daily with the tide. And it's always also affected by the seasons, where you have, in your wet season, you have a lot of fresh water coming down, and that influences the plant communities. And so it's a real dynamic system there in terms of the plant communities. It shifts with the shifting influence of salt.
The Gulf of Mexico has influenced the region in much larger ways in the past. The geological record shows that the Gulf has covered huge amounts of the land over millions of years. Upstream on one of the Pascagoula's main tributaries, David Dockery studies environmental change and the flow of this natural river system from a geological perspective.
We're on the Chickasawhay River about 100 miles north of the Pascagoula, maybe 150 miles north of the Gulf Coast, and yet this area of Mississippi was covered by an ocean, a tropical sea, about 30 million years ago, and we're here to look for evidence of that old ocean. This is the contact between the 60 feet of limestone above us, which is in the Cook Mountain Formation, and some 200 feet of sand and clay, which is in the Kosciuszko Formation. This is the point in which the ocean covered the delta. Here we have dark organic clays that have a lot of organic material in them. That's part of the delta, and above us is the limestone that was part of the seafloor. And again, this contact when the ocean covered this area happened about 41 million years ago. So Mississippi has a history of being flooded by the ocean and beds deposited in the ocean like this limestone. And then when the sea recedes, we have deltas and rivers that deposit sands and clays. And there are thousands of feet of sediment that are just alternating sections of marine beds and then deltaic deposits.
Just as the Gulf of Mexico influences the Pascagoula, so the Pascagoula impacts the Gulf.
We're standing here at the dock facility of the National Marine Fisheries Service Pascagoula, Mississippi Laboratory. We're located at the lower end of the Pascagoula River as it enters into the Mississippi Sound. We'll be taking a boat out shortly and going from the river into the Sound and out into the Gulf, so we'll be able to see the influence that the Pascagoula River has on those bodies of water.
Rivers have a profound impact on the oceans into which they flow. When they are healthy, they contribute to the abundance of wildlife living in coastal habitats. Ian Workman is a scientist who studies the impact of fresh water on the Gulf Coast ecosystems.
We have some indication of how the river has effect. We have a plankton bloom that we just encountered, and those oftentimes are caused by the nutrients coming out of the rivers. And the Pascagoula River, of course, does carry nutrients out into the Gulf. These are good things because they provide a lot of feed for the marine life out here.
The healthy condition of the Pascagoula River contributes to the health of this region of the Gulf. So much so, in fact, that fish species that have disappeared from other areas of the Gulf continue to exist here. Upriver, another part of the ecological drama, is being played out. Dr. Stephen Ross and his team stretch nets across the water. Here they'll tag and record data on one of the rarest fish in the world, the endangered Gulf sturgeon. These sturgeon once roamed the Gulf Coast from Florida to Louisiana, but because of overfishing, dams, development, and pollution, they now exist in only a handful of rivers. Here, with continued care and protection of the river, they may have a chance to prosper once again.
Since 1997, my research group has been studying Gulf sturgeon in the Pascagoula River, basically trying to collect fish, put sonic and radio tags on them and track them to see where they're going, what kind of habitat they're using. And fairly early on, we were able to document a spawning area in the Bowie River, which is actually within Hattiesburg city limits. And that's over 200 kilometers upstream from the Gulf. And so the fish come into the Pascagoula River in late February, early March, and those that spawn actually travel all the way up the Pascagoula through the Leaf River into the Bowie River, and they get up to the Bowie River around early April, first or second week in April. And normally after spawning, then they'll move back down to what we call a summer holding area that's about 40 to 50 kilometers from the Gulf. And the fish will stay there generally into September, October, and then we'll move out into the Gulf.
Ready? Yep. 73 pounds.
There we go. Is that it trying to come out right there?
Yeah. Is that it? This is a fish that's previously been processed. She's a recapture. And that was the pit tag that we were scanning for. Total length, 164 and a half.
This will allow us to follow this sturgeon once it goes into the Mississippi Sound and maybe into the Gulf.
Taking a small cross section out of the leading ray on the fin, and we can grind that down and then examine growth rings on it, similar to the way you would age a tree.
Another component of our study has been to try and determine where these fish go once they leave the river, and so we have in this case used sonic tags that emit a sound, a little beep, and we track them out in the Gulf. And what we've learned is that these fish actually move out around the barrier islands and congregate in the passes. Passes have fairly clean sand because of current movements, and they feed heavily while they're in the Gulf, and then most of them will move back into freshwater again in following February.
Gulf sturgeon respond to the natural rise and fall of the river throughout the year as cues for movement and spawning. These rhythms of nature follow the seasonal changes in temperature and rainfall. The Pascagoula's beauty has drawn many to it for recreation and play. The earliest inhabitants, though, depended on the river for their very existence.